Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, thanks so much for coming. I'm really excited to talk about this. This is something that I rant a lot about, and I'm really excited to talk about it in a more academic setting with who I think are probably pretty like-minded. So if you'll just indulge me, let me just tell you about the first time that I like first started thinking about this. I was 6 years old, and I was obsessed with Superman. My grandma made me a blue and white or blue and red cape that I velcroed around my neck. And so I'd go out to the backyard, I'd disconnect one of the chains to each of the swings on the backyard swing set, and then I'd grab onto them and kind of swing with them like Tarzan style, and I'd pretend that I could fly. And I was like obsessed with Superman. Everything at Halloween, I dressed up as Supergirl. I didn't know actually that there was a real character named Supergirl. I wanted to be Superman, but a girl, because Superman was so cool and he was everything I wanted to be, but I was a girl. So, just like putting the two together. So I wore the cape. And then my mom helped me find like a skirt and boots. She gave me this like star spangled top to go with it. And there was this like gold flashing tiara, and she curled my hair, and obviously I have very dark hair, and I thought I looked incredible. Not quite like Superman, but pretty cool, right? And I was mystified as the night went on why everybody at every house we went to asked if I was Wonder Woman, and I didn't know who Wonder Woman was, but she sounded really boring. And when my mom said, "Oh yeah, it's that person from this TV show," and I was like, "Oh, that's really boring," like the old '70s TV show. And I obviously hadn't caught the vision, right? But I did not understand who that was. I didn't understand who they were supposing me to be. So I would correct them again and again, that no, I am Supergirl like Superman, but a girl, and they had a hard time believing me. And when I got a little bit older, I would play X-Men with the neighbor next door. Obviously, I've been obsessed with superheroes for quite some time. I always felt very limited in the characters that I could choose. He would always be Cyclops or Wolverine, but he could choose from any number of people. And there were only like three girl X-Men that I knew. There was Storm, Rogue, or Jean Grey. And it was really hard to like pantomime summoning storms. And Jean sounded like an old lady name, so I was always Rogue, except I didn't know what she really did. And my neighbor didn't really understand what she did either. So again, I felt very limited. And I like telling these stories because I think it's really illustrative about some of the limitations that we often see with female characters, particularly female superhero characters. Um, because when you look at the way that women and girls are typically depicted in these kinds of movies, these kinds of action heavy movies, they are seemingly harmless portrayals of, like, look at this woman. She's perfect in every single way. Oh, and look at this big, strong man, right? But the portrayals that we see trickle down through audience consciousness and can potentially have real consequences. So even though I was still reading sentences like Sam and Anne run, run, Sam run, I was already picking up on the portrayal of women on screen and figuring out how to incorporate what I saw and heard and was told about those characters into how I acted in the real world. Obviously, a lot has changed since the 90s, and especially since we've seen this explosion of superhero type movies, which I think is fantastic. We've got the Marvel Cinematic Universe dominating the box office since Iron Man came out in 2008, so over a decade. And since then, there's been this near constant presence of a superhero movie at the cinema. And besides that, the characters are everywhere, right? You see them at the toy aisle, they're on party supplies, on clothes, fast food kids' meals, breakfast cereal. There are spin off TV shows. Either already on TV, having already ended their seasons, or in development for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And this is to say nothing of the DC universe, which has its own shows on the CW, and then this string of movies, which again then lead to depictions of these heroes on all kinds of products. And it is tremendous business. So in 2019, Avengers Endgame alone made 2.8 billion at the box office. Just a couple of months before that, another Marvel movie, Captain Marvel, earned 1.13 billion, right? This is a lot of money. We cannot escape the superhero genre, whether we not want to or not. We can't. And at the very least, we can understand the potential impact that these characterizations can have on us as a society, particularly as they pertain to women. I'm going to be drawing on some of my experience and the experience of other women that I know for this. I'm not going to be touching on the male portrayal very much because I have very little experience in that realm. And I am also not going to be examining very closely the depictions of, for example, trans characters, gay characters, because first off, that is just a very large scope to be taking. And this is already kind of a big undertaking. And I don't feel that I would necessarily do those groups justice without a lot more research on my part. So this is going to be a pretty narrow examination, but I hope that it is useful anyway. So in addition to narrowing the group that I'm looking at, I'm also primarily going to be looking at 4 characters because they are the 4 female characters who have gotten their own solo films. Captain Marvel and Black Widow from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and then DC's Wonder Woman and Harley Quinn. And my goal has been not only to see how, in the case of characters that have been in multiple films, they've evolved over the course of their stories, but how their characterizations compare to that of their male colleagues in terms of nuance and complexity. I just figure if we're going to be consuming hours and hours of superpowered entertainment, the least we can do is look at the proverbial nutrition label. So very first, I want to talk about Black Widow since she has been around the longest, at least for this iteration of superhero stories in our current landscape. So Scarlett Johansson has played Black Widow since 2010 when the character appeared in Iron Man 2. But she's actually the last of the characters that I'm looking at today to get her own movie. Black Widow, which is a prequel to the Avengers movies, is still delayed by COVID-19. Hopefully we'll see it this year sometime. But she has had the most screen time by far. She has appeared as a character in 10 Marvel movies, not counting her own film. So 10 movies that are out. And in large part of this wealth of screen time, she's had the opportunity to develop as a character. We, as the audience, have seen her as a ruthless killer, as a compassionate friend, as a selfless hero, and a woman with regrets. Unfortunately, during the course of her inclusion in the MICU, she's also been teased as a love interest for 4 of her 5 main Avengers colleagues. So there was Iron Man in Iron Man 2, Hawkeye in Avengers, the first one, Captain America in Captain America Winter Soldier, and Hulk in Avengers Rise of Ultron. As a viewer, these pairings, I felt very forced, as if the filmmakers felt that, aliens and Norse gods and resurrected World War II heroes all running around fighting each other wasn't compelling enough without a little sexual tension. I just feel like not every story has to be a love story, and I seem to be overruled by the people who make these movies. And I think that this is possibly filmmakers anticipating what audiences want rather than actually responding to what audiences want. But that might be a rant for another day. So in addition to her odd will they or won't they with 80% of the core team, Black Widow also tended to have to emotionally accommodate other team members more than anyone else. So she had to perform emotional labor for others that her male colleagues didn't seem to have to think about, right? So for example, to go back to her relationship, even the non-sexual tension part of the relationship with Hawkeye, she's doing a lot of emotional labor. With Hulk, she's like calming him down. With Captain America, she's making him feel better. This can arguably be considered a part of a nuanced character, but the fact that the only woman on the team is the one assigned the role of an emotional helpmeet, it plays a little bit too close to traditional gender stereotypes to feel like an authentic part of a person, especially one purported to be as independent of cultural expectations as Black Widow. And while that kind of weird adherence to cultural expectations could be seen as a realistic commentary on how even, quote unquote, independent women have difficulty escaping from certain societal obligations, including providing free emotional labor, the fact that this sort of slight reinforcement of stereotypes appears again and again and again in characters makes it a trope, not a statement. And then finally, her death, if you haven't seen Avengers Endgame, I'm so sorry for the spoiler, comes in the form of a sacrifice for a male character. This does have a rationale within the plot and within the established facets of both characters, but again, the fact that Black Widow provides this sacrifice, which then spurs Hawkeye on to restore his heroic nature, it hints at this thing that we call fridging, right? Which just basically means killing off a female character, well, a character, but usually female, for the sake of motivating a male character. It is not inherently bad to kill off a female character, right? And it's not inherently bad to use tragedy to motivate another character, but the fact that female characters proportionally die far more often than male characters suggests that these deaths might not be solely out of true necessity to the plot. Also within the Marvel universe, and kind of on the polar opposite of like how much time we've seen them on screen, is Captain Marvel. She is the newest of these characters that I'm looking at today to appear on screen, and she's only been around for less than 2 years. So Captain Marvel came out just before Avengers Endgame. She has been depicted by Brie Larson, and she is the first of these characters to have been introduced in her own movie before appearing in an ensemble film. Her character also got the most immediate criticism of these four as well. Although, again, she made $1.13 billion at the box office, so I guess it didn't really hurt the numbers. Captain Marvel as a character is cocky. She's resourceful, she is quick to blast away bad guys, and she doesn't get hung up on the legality of things when she's saving the day. This is not an unfamiliar archetype for characters in comic books or thrillers or crime dramas. And there are several other characters within the MCU, including Iron Man, Ant-Man, Star-Lord, Spider-Man sometimes, that share these traits. But there was a lot of ire at Captain Marvel's behavior, because for some reason it seemed to strike a nerve more than these other characters' actions have. So a tweet storm of this criticism struck particularly hard after a deleted extended scene was released before the Blu-ray DVD launch of the movie. And this extended scene shows the character midway through the movie. She's encountering a motorcyclist who offers to help her read a map and then tells her to smile. So in the theatrical version of the scene, she ignores him, but then later steals his bike and some clothes from a nearby mannequin. In the deleted scene, it goes a little bit differently. So in the theatrical version, she ignores him, steals his bike. In the extended edition, the deleted extended edition of that scene, or extended version of that scene, he says like, "Hey, can I help you? How about I give you a smile?" And by the way, she's not asked for his help, and she introduces her, or she offers to give him a handshake instead, and then she gives him a crushing grip and unleashes some of her powers on him, offering to release him in exchange for his bike, jacket, and helmet. And then she rides off and continues her mission. This man forgotten. So the Mirror reported on this tweet storm, and as they write, the scene was intended to show Captain Marvel's response to toxic masculinity. It got backlash instead. So as one tweet said, "Captain Marvel tortures a man, steals his motorcycle, yikes. Movie scenes like this will definitely not help feminist causes. The man's crime, he asked a woman to smile. Just imagine if a man treated a woman like this in our society." And then another tweet said, "I would like to take time out and discuss the Captain Marvel deleted first scene where she breaks a man's hand and steals his jacket and motorcycle. Not only does it make her an asshole, but Carol Danvers did not need that motorcycle she can fly. These writers are idiots." And because this is a tweet storm, there's never just one side. There were other Twitter users who cheered the scene, and they suggested that much of the criticism was, in fact, actually coming from a place of toxic masculinity. So one person said, "Fanboys are flipping their shit at a deleted scene where Captain Marvel stole a dude's jacket and bike that was telling her to smile and shit. Didn't Ant-Man start the movie robbing someone, and Guardians of the Galaxy were bad guys originally, and she was in a new place? And why is anyone upset about Captain Marvel deleted scene? Unless they're upset by all violence, they have no ground to stand on. She wasn't even Captain Marvel by that point in the movie anyway. Bunch of whiny jerks." So as you can see, there are two very different opinions about this very polarizing scene. There was also a lot of criticism about the end of Captain Marvel, and this was actually just in the theatrical version, where, spoiler, I'm sorry, if you haven't seen it. Her former mentor, Jan Rog, who's Jude Law, if anyone's curious, says he is proud of her for how much she's improved her powers, and he challenges her to a fight without weapons or powers to see if she's improved enough to finally beat him. Rather than proving herself with the fight, she shoots him with the blast of her power and then tells him that she has nothing to prove to him. This portion of the film was criticized as showing Captain Marvel cheating with her powers and proving Jan Rog's earlier accusation that she was too dependent on them to be a truly skilled warrior. Other people, though, lauded that scene for showing a woman dismissing the need for a man's validation of her skills. In both cases, Captain Marvel's actions can be criticized or celebrated for subverting gender stereotypes of what a female hero or a female character ought to do. And who's right, who's wrong doesn't really matter. I mean, I have my own opinions, but I think that the discourse for this is most interesting, and especially how it compares and contrasts to the crickets that are largely heard when male characters do these types of things. So moving out of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, looking at Wonder Woman, you see this very interesting clash of visions about who the character should be. So Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman first appeared in 2016's Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, which is terrible, which is just a horrible, horrible movie. It is so bad. And she was like the one good part of that movie. Her character had been teased earlier in that movie, but did not spring into action until the final conflict with Doomsday. And it was like, oh, look, she's here to save the entire movie, in my opinion. A year later, she got her own origin movie, part of Warner Brothers' attempt to replicate the McCaffrey success with a DC extended cinematic universe. And I don't know how that's going for them, but the film was fantastic. It was the first female-led superhero movie since Catwoman and Electro in 2004, 2005. And those were really, really bad if you ever saw those. And it also, for the first time, put a woman, Patty Jenkins, at the helm. Patty Jenkins directed it. First time that had happened, which seems really weird to me. I think that really should have happened earlier, but it did not. Early promotional materials looked good, right? But the performance of again, Elektra, Catwoman, meant that success was no way guaranteed, especially with how bad Batman v Superman was. But it performed really, really well. Again, it was fantastic, and it did really well at the box office. Not Captain Marvel well, but $100.5 million in its first weekend. Not bad. It was actually the highest opening sales for a female-directed movie. In addition to the quality of the movie, fans lauded the lack of a male gaze or a sexual exploitation of female characters, as evidenced by multiple aspects of direction, camera work, costume design, and other technical facets of the film. So, for example, even though Wonder Woman in her quintessential armor is very revealing, right? Like lots of thighs, lots of arms. Hey, look, here's my here's most of my body covered with this form-fitting set of armor. But that is taken very closely from actual Roman armor. Right, a metal breastplate only on the left side to allow for ease of bow firing. Buckle on greaves, skirts cut high over the thighs so as not to impede movement. The high cut skirt also allows viewers to see when Wonder Woman lands from a significant height at the end of the movie, the jiggle of her thigh muscle, which is such a weird thing to get hung up on, but that kind of a thing was such a big deal. People were so excited to see that because it doesn't happen. If you look at other action movies with women in them, with female characters, their muscles seem to go to great pains to not jiggle. Whatever trickery they use, female character muscles just don't jiggle because it's not considered sexy, I guess. So it was really refreshing to see, like, this woman has muscles. She's using her muscles. Look at the muscles jiggle, like a real person. Wonder Woman as a character also feels as though she were concocted without consideration of the male gaze. She has a romantic interest, Steve Trevor, but that does not define her character or her arc. In fact, his character and arc are actually secondary to hers, and he actually alters his actions to help support her pursuits. She frequently does demonstrate her ability as a warrior, But this quality does not preclude her from taking delight in simple, like soft things, right? If you've seen it, you probably remember when she saw a smiling baby and kind of freaked out, or when she had an ice cream cone and she was just so delighted in how delicious it was. Wonder Woman exudes joy as well as sorrow and clearly sees the worst in people, but chooses to focus on the best. Um, the strong female characterization doesn't stop at Wonder Woman either. Steve's assistant, Etta, is a suffragist, the woman responsible for developing Germany's armies, or the German army's chemical weapons. Dr. Poison is also a woman, and she is depicted as a ruthless and obsessive scientist whose cruelty and like heartlessness are exploited by the film's antagonist. But again, she's a strong character who is also a woman. Um, Comparing Wonder Woman with previous superhero films draws enough of a contrast in what a heroine looks like with the male gaze and without. But because Wonder Woman has been in now Justice League and Batman v Superman, we have a real contrast in like a very, very stark contrast in how she's depicted depending on who's depicting her. So Justice League opened only 5 months later, and same actress, same IP universe, supposedly the same story, right? But it was a wildly different depiction. So Shruti Sunderman is a blogger at the Lady's Finger, and she wrote about this, quote, "The problem with Zack Snyder's Justice League is not the redesigns of the costumers, or the costumes, or the plot lines, but its inherent gaze. In Wonder Woman, Diana was introduced as a warrior princess out to save the world. Jenkins highlighted Diana's compassion, abilities, and spunk above everything else. The female gaze held the woman to the standards to which she holds herself. Snyder reduced Wonder Woman to the sexist ashes from which she was raised by Jenkins. Wonder Woman is easily the best and sanest of the golden trio she's part of with Batman and Superman. She has an inherent kindness, but it is never impeded by logic. At the same time, her decisions are not marred by overt sentimentality either. She's intuitive, fierce, and has an unforgiving courage. But of course, for Zack Snyder, she is a sword-swishing woman with the greatest butt his camera has beheld. Patty Jenkins showed him better. She taught the superhero world that the sexist treatment of female characters in superhero movie plots are not inherently linked concepts. But Snyder didn't learn and created a league of his own, male gazers, and they certainly do no justice to the league or otherwise." Um, in addition to the contrast between Wonder Woman's solo movie and her inclusion in the ensemble films, a leaked script from a potential 2005 Joss Whedon-driven Wonder Woman shows how different that solo effort could have been. In the script, Whedon's script introduces Wonder Woman herself, the main character, as, quote, "To say she is beautiful is almost to miss the point. She is elemental, as natural and wild as the luminous flora surrounding. Her dark hair waterfalls to her shoulders in soft arcs and curls. Her body is curvaceous, but taut as a drawn bow." The bulk of the rest of the script is primarily from the point of view and concerned with Steve Trevor. And there are a lot of there are a few reasons that is a little bit unfair to like exactly reflect on Joss Whedon, although the last few days have made any conclusions that we could draw about his perhaps sexist gaze a little simpler, maybe. But it is true that that was an early script. And so maybe it would have changed a lot in development. And it was over a decade ago. So, maybe things would have changed. And it's also true that scripts tend to be like really sexist when describing their female characters. But that script, Snyder's treatment of Wonder Woman, all of these other things that surround it give a valuable look at how small differences in the production and vision for a project can lead to wildly different interpretations of the same character. I'm going to touch briefly on Wonder Woman 1984, right? 1984. Yes, I always confuse that with the 1985. Oh, I always confuse with the book. Anyway, I felt that I don't want to stay very long on it. I did feel that broadly the characters stayed the same. It was still the same actor, still Patty Jenkins at the helm. There was a little bit more focus on Steve Trevor. I'm not going to go too far into it because I was a bit disappointed, and I choose to believe that that was just a sophomore slump in the characterizations, and nothing could be better than Wonder Woman. And I will think more about this as we get kind of a third data point to look at with her next movie. So going on and talking about other things that were perhaps disappointing, not as not as disappointing as Batman v Superman. If I can just like give it one more dig to that, let's talk about Harley Quinn. So the less said about Suicide Squad is the better, because it was really not good. The 2016 anti-hero film did give us Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn, which brought about last year's Birds of Prey, which was later retitled Birds of Prey, The Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn, when Warner Brothers became concerned that moviegoers wouldn't know what it was about. Even though I feel that Birds of Prey, I don't know, it was a marketing issue. Anyway, Suicide Squad featured an imprisoned Harley Quinn pining over the Joker. But Birds of Prey showed a heartbroken Harley who had to deal with the repercussions of her behavior while with the Joker. In Suicide Squad, Harley Quinn was this sex kitten on display, whereas Harley Quinn in Birds of Prey was a train wreck. Instead of the perfectly curled pigtails with pristine makeup, hot pants, and crop tops that she had in Suicide Squad, she had messy hair, smudged makeup, and clothes that would still make a mother blush, but looked like something that her character would genuinely pick out. It seemed really, really difficult to imagine Birds of Prey, Harley Quinn as maybe being the next hot Halloween costume as Suicide Squad's Harley Quinn was, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Harley Quinn's self-destructive tendencies and moods that swung wildly between sadness, anger, self-pity, and hope speak closely to what heartbreak actually looks at, although, with more violence and hijinks than most people typically have after a breakup. While the Joker exists in memories, and the antagonist and his sidekick are both male, the focus in Birds of Prey is squarely on its female characters. This is not, I'm not going to engage in like a critique of the film as a whole, but there are a lot of useful characterizations and devices to examine in this discussion about women in superhero movies. So in addition to Harley, the titular Birds of Prey include Black Canary, Huntress, and Detective Montoya, who all come from very different perspectives, have very different wants, very different concerns, but they eventually have to work together to protect a teenage girl who picked the wrong pocket, and now everyone's after the thing that she picked. Each of the characters has their own unique backstory, and they are all riddled with unique trauma, predominantly from male characters. But they also all have their own ways of dealing with it and their own approaches to finding a solution. The film was written and directed by a woman, and it avoids depicting the female characters as female characters. This is not to say that their gender is just a convenient thing. Their gender is definitely an inexorable part of their character, but it only is part of a much more complex whole. Them teaming up in this way is a little bit pat, but it feels less contrived than the girl power moment at the end of Avengers Endgame, where all of the female superheroes came together for no particular reason than to come together. At least it felt like to me. Whereas Birds of Prey, they all had a specific goal, specific mission, and they had specific ties bringing them together, which is something that I felt Avengers Endgame lacked. It just seemed like they got together because they were all girls. Whereas Birds of Prey, they had reasons for getting together, as inconvenient or convenient as they might be. Birds of Prey also lacks the male gaze by portraying Harley as a walking train wreck, but it doesn't punish her for it. It gives its characters, male and female, multifaceted arcs powered by self-interest, powered by ambition, thoughtlessness, or fear, but they avoid a fixation on sex. And also in resting a major plot point on one character's elusive bowel movement. That right there subverts a number of gender stereotypes, which often prevent any discussions from ever suggesting that women might have to go to the bathroom ever. So even though gender and traditional power dynamics rested at the heart of this film, the characters themselves seemed otherwise unconcerned with it. And this brings me to my next point. So there is a difference between female characters and characters who are female. In the discussion about female characterization, it is important to clarify what constitutes an actually good character, a good female character. So the most frequently used tool to determine whether a female has a good female character is the Bechdel test, also known as the Bechdel-Wallace test. This was coined in 1985 by Alison Bechdel. And the test requires that two named female characters in a film talk to each other about some topic other than men. And that's it. There are other tests. There's the Mokomori. I'm a little bit nervous, and so I'm forgetting things. A test that requires that a woman have her own arc that is separate from the interests of a man's. But most often when we go back to it, we talk about the Bechdel test. And the research that I collected also refers or goes back to the Bechdel test, so that's what I'm going to stick with right now. So movie studios have picked up on the allure of having films that pass this extremely basic test. According to a 2018 analysis of movies of 350 films that were analyzed, the 105 described as being female-led earned more in every category than those that were described as being male-led. As basic as the test is, though, many films still fail it. In that same study, 40% of films examined did not pass the Bechdel test. As authors of the study noted, the test in itself is an admittedly low bar, e.g., films can pass with a single line of dialogue. That fact makes it perhaps even more surprising that so many films still fail to pass this low bar. The underlying assumption in the requirement of the Bechdel test is that having two named women discussing something other than men suggests that their characters exist in a way that is not wholly dependent on male characters. It suggests autonomy and a nuance, but the letter of the law outweighs the spirit. So, for example, the original Star Wars trilogy, all of which was released before the Bechdel test between 1977 and 1983, does not pass. Despite Princess Leia being a strong and complex character. That would be one more to pass the Mokomori test. The 2012's two-headed shark attack is another drastic example. It features two topless girls kissing at the request of a man they're with before the three of them are eaten by the titular two-headed shark. But it passes. It passes because earlier in the film, two named characters talked about a boat for 2 seconds and then talked about men again. So the Bechdel test is a good start, but it in itself cannot be taken as a delineation between a feminist film and a patriarchal film. Another good point of consideration is what is meant by a strong female character. The adjective is rarely used when discussing male characters, and when it is used in reference to female characters, it often describes a very particular type of character. So there's this post in the New Statesman America that I thought put it really well. No one ever asks if a male character is strong, nor if he is feisty or kick-ass. Come to that. The obvious thing to say here is that it is because he's assumed to be strong by default. Part of the patronizing promise of the strong female character is that she's anomalous. Don't worry, that puff piece or interview is saying when it boasts the hero's love interest is an SFC. Of course, normal women are weak and boring and can't do anything worthwhile, but this one is different. She's strong. See, she roundhouses people in the face. Sometimes the phrase, not your typical damsel in distress, will be used as if the writing of pop culture heroines has not been improved on even slightly since Disney's Snow White, and if a goodly percentage of SFCs do not end up, in fact, needing to be rescued, end quote. Despite the fact that male characters are not specified to be strong as a stereotypical virtue, this kind of stereotype that the strong female character represents has a corollary among male characters too. Think about Rambo or most roles that Arnold Schwarzenegger has played. These characters were strong, yes, but they lacked depth, nuance, humanity, right? They could have been stand-ins for many other characters. They didn't have the uniqueness that made them a necessary character for their own movie. In this 2019 Medium post, I thought put it well, strong characters lack flaws, are never really challenged, and are always tougher and better than other characters. Characters who are strong rather than who are strong characters, so characters who are strong, have flaws, have challenges, and are fleshed out without the fear of that doing so will make them seem weak. In terms of female superheroes, this perhaps could be adapted to define the difference between female superheroes and superheroes who are female, or female characters and characters who are female. The former is concerned with the character fitting into a certain role or stereotype, while the latter allows the character to exist in the story and the universe in more complex and diverse ways. Well, this is not a proposal to do away with gender in characters. Relying on a character's gender to do the heavy lifting of characterization is just simply lazy writing, and also it results in missed opportunities for better and more interesting stereotypes. So why does this even matter, right? This is me talking about why this matters. Why does this matter to anybody else? Not every film has to be a masterpiece in characterization. We don't have to throw out Rambo because it's just Steven Stallone being a one-note character. We can watch a movie simply for entertainment, but what we see, even as mindless entertainment, can carry on in very real ways long after the credits roll. Psychologists and sociologists have long noted a connection between limited and stereotypical portrayals of minorities in the media, for example, with public perceptions at large. So, in 1986, there was an episode of the $25,000 Pyramid in which a contestant had to get their celebrity partner, whom they'd never met before, to say a certain word. The contestant and the celebrity, again, hadn't met before the show. They came from vastly different backgrounds. But when the contestant gave the clue East LA, the celebrity immediately and correctly guessed gangs. A researcher who examined this episode as part of his ongoing research noted that the stereotype was so common because of the consistent portrayal of the heavily Mexican-American area of LA being a haven for gang violence, even though the stereotype was ignored the much more realistic and smaller magnitude of the problem, as well as other positive components of that neighborhood. We saw a huge spike moving on after Hidden Figures came out in 2016. In the number of school-age girls engaging in STEM subjects, that is, science, technology, engineering, and math. Forbes had a whole thought piece about it and said, quote, "We know girls and women face external hardships while studying and working in STEM, such as microaggressions, sexism, isolation, and exclusion. We also know that deterrents such as these increase the underrepresented girl, i.e. a Black girl, a Latina girl, or a Native girl. What Hidden Figures has helped to show the public is the identity of Black and female were turned into unethical, inefficient, and nonsensical obstacles that these remarkably intelligent and driven mathematicians and engineers had to face." The film.
Which female superhero would you like most to see in a solo movie that hasn't had one yet?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I guess I can't ask the follow-up of like previously introduced or just from the comics.
Probably either way, whichever you want.
Probably either way. I'm really glad that the Scarlet Witch has her own series because I think she's a fascinating character, and so I'm really glad that that's getting explored in that way. I think that let's see, I would say. See, I'm trying to think of like who's like likely to get them and who's not.
But who's your favorite?
Yeah, I probably would have said Scarlet. Huh? From comic books, is my favorite. I mean, I think there are a lot of really interesting female superheroes that haven't graced the screen yet. For example, Hellcat, or like from the Marvel comics, is I think fascinating. And yeah, I would say her if I had to go from the comics, because she's like a very nuanced, broken character. Overcomes a bunch of stuff. Anyway, she's really cool. And for like movies and people who are already introduced, I'm really glad that Scarlet Witch is getting some love.
Have you watched the Scarlet Witch series? Do you like it? Do you think it's portrayed her reasonably?
I do. Okay, so I haven't finished it because my husband will get mad at me if I watch it without him. But what I've seen of it, I really do like of her, and I think that she is portrayed really well. She's a very complex character if you read like different incarnations of her within the comics, and I think that she's being portrayed really well.
What about your least favorite depiction of a female superhero in recent movies?
I mean, it's probably going to be Black Widow, which I think is a real shame because I think Scarlett Johansson is super talented, and I think that she does so much with the material that she is given. But I am holding out a lot of hope for her movie, but I just think that she was sold short a lot of times in all 10 of the movies that she was in.
Emma Spencer has a question here. I'm curious because I've never saw Black Widow as a love interest in many of these movies, just as a friend, or maybe a bit flirtatious, but never with genuine interest. What do you think?
Yeah, I can see that criticism. I just like, I characterize her as a love interest because of that like element of sexual tension. Black Widow and Bruce had that moment in Age of Ultron and the farmhouse when there were like overt romantic gestures. I felt that there were very strong hints at romance between her and Hawkeye, and then she did make out with Chris Evans, Captain America, in Winter Soldier for mission related reasons. But Was that necessary? I don't think it was necessary. And I will definitely acknowledge that the flirtation in Iron Man 2 was for mission purposes only. So that's fair. But still, like, the tension, did it need to be there all of the time? I don't think it needed to be there all the time.
All right, Mary asks, without too many spoilers, how do you feel about the prospect of Scarlet Witch being the primary antagonist for MCU Stage 4?
Ooh, I'd be okay with that. I mean, I think that that is allowing her, like, in allowing her to go from like hero to villain potentially. I think that if we're just speaking on like a theoretical, in like a theoretical sense, right? No spoilers. I think that that would allow her to like express grief in a way that is unacceptable. And like therefore seems really honest to that character. If you read in the comic books, like she is a very strong character who has been broken in a lot of ways and finds a lot of different ways to cope. And if some of those end up looking like villainous things, or if she does end up acting like a villain, I think it stays very true to the character that has been developed in comics and in various incarnations for decades now.
Awesome. I think we're pretty close to out of time, so thank you very much for your presentation. We really enjoyed it. And next thing in this room is The Unexpected That Comes Unseen, comparing Bilbo Baggins to the celestial mariner Earendil. I can't say that name. Anyway.
I don't know if Tolkien can say that name, frankly. Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you for your questions too. They were great.
Thank you so much.